Learn to hear the voice of Jesus in your daily decisions through the teachings of the Holy Spirit. What if I told you that one of life's greatest challenges isn't the external pressures we face, but something much more fundamental, the struggle to make decisions with confidence and clarity? Have you ever found yourself at a crossroads, feeling the weight of a choice before you, wishing for some form of guidance that transcends conventional wisdom? In those quiet moments of uncertainty, when you're considering a career change, navigating a complex relationship, facing a moral dilemma, or simply trying to prioritize your daily life, there's often a longing for wisdom beyond our own limited perspective, something deeper than just pragmatic analysis or emotional impulse. This universal human experience crosses cultural and spiritual boundaries. Throughout history, people have sought guidance beyond themselves, described in various ways across different traditions. Some call it intuition, others inner wisdom, divine guidance, or spiritual insight. In the Christian tradition, this is often understood as hearing the voice of Jesus through the teachings of the Holy Spirit, a concept that, regardless of your personal belief system, points to a profound truth about human experience, that many of us sense there is wisdom available that transcends our limited perspective. Whether you approach this from a position of established faith, spiritual curiosity, or even respectful skepticism, there's something valuable here to explore. The principles we'll discuss transcend rigid religious frameworks while honoring the profound spiritual insights they contain. Think about your own experience for a moment. Have you ever had that sense of knowing, a quiet certainty about a direction to take that went beyond logical analysis? Or perhaps you've witnessed someone make decisions with a remarkable clarity and wisdom that seem to come from a deeper source. Maybe you've experienced moments when unexpected insights arrived precisely when you needed them most. These experiences, while often framed in religious language by some, reflect a dimension of human experience that many people recognize. Regardless of their belief system, the language we use to describe these phenomena may differ, but the experience itself, that sense of guidance beyond our limited perspective, appears across cultures and worldviews. What makes this topic particularly relevant is that we live in an age of unprecedented choice and complexity. Never before have humans faced so many decisions with such far-reaching consequences and such a bewildering array of options. The mental and emotional burden of constant decision-making contributes significantly to contemporary anxiety and stress. Finding a reliable source of wisdom and guidance has never been more crucial for our well-being. If you've ever wished for greater clarity in your decision-making, a way to access wisdom beyond your own limited perspective, I invite you to reflect in the comments on a time when you felt guided by something greater than yourself in making an important decision. Your experience, described in your own words and from your own perspective, might offer valuable insight to others on similar journeys. In this exploration, we'll discuss 12 principles that can help anyone, regardless of their spiritual background, develop greater sensitivity to guidance that transcends our ordinary thinking. These insights draw from spiritual wisdom traditions while connecting with contemporary understanding of psychology, neuroscience, and human development. By the end of our time together, I'll guide you through a reflective practice that many have found helpful in creating space for deeper guidance to emerge in their daily decision-making. This practice can be adapted to fit your own belief system and comfort level, offering benefits regardless of your spiritual perspective. Stay with me throughout this journey as the insights build upon each other, culminating in the final principle, which addresses perhaps the most common obstacle that prevents people from accessing deeper wisdom in their everyday choices. If you find value in exploring these concepts, please consider liking this video and subscribing to this channel. Doing so helps this content reach others who might be searching for similar guidance in their lives. Your engagement creates community, around these important conversations about how we navigate life's complex decisions. I'm curious about the diversity of perspectives watching this message. If you feel comfortable, share in the comments where you're connecting from and what brought you to this exploration. Understanding the various journeys that led you here helps create a richer conversation around these universal human experiences. Take a moment now to reflect on your current approach to decision-making. What sources of wisdom do you typically rely on? How satisfied are you with your process? Are there particular types of decisions where you feel most uncertain or would most value additional guidance? This self-awareness creates a foundation for the insights we'll explore together. Have you ever noticed how some people seem to navigate life with an unusual level of wisdom and discernment? Their decisions, even in complex situations, often reflect an insight that goes beyond conventional thinking. They possess a clarity that doesn't ignore practical realities, but somehow transcends them, integrating heart and mind in a way that produces consistently life-giving choices. Our first principle addresses a fundamental shift in how we approach guidance. True guidance is not about waiting for dramatic interventions, but developing sensitivity to a wisdom that's already speaking. This principle represents a paradigm shift for many people. Often when seeking guidance, we position ourselves as if waiting for something external to break through to us, a dramatic sign, an audible voice, or some unmistakable intervention. But what if the reality is quite different? What if guidance is already present, already speaking, and our primary challenge is developing the sensitivity to recognize it? This insight appears across spiritual traditions. In the Christian context, Jesus often said, "Whoever has ears to hear, let them hear," suggesting that divine communication was already occurring, but required a certain quality of attention to perceive. Similarly, contemplative traditions across cultures speak of developing an inner ear or eye of the heart that perceives what ordinary awareness misses. Contemporary neuroscience offers interesting parallels through research on the adaptive unconscious, the mind's ability to process information and reach conclusions outside our conscious awareness. Studies show that our brains constantly receive and process far more information than rises to conscious attention. What we consciously hear internally is only a small portion of the wisdom potentially available to us. This understanding shifts our approach from trying to make guidance happen to cultivating the conditions where we can recognize guidance that's already being offered. It's less about technique and more about developing receptivity, creating the conditions where deeper wisdom can be heard above the noise of our busy minds and hectic lives. Have you noticed in your own experience how insights often come not when you're straining to figure something out, but in moments of receptivity? Perhaps during a walk while showering or upon waking. These moments when our analytical mind relaxes often allow deeper wisdom to rise to conscious awareness. If you've experienced this phenomenon of guidance emerging when you weren't forcing it, consider sharing a brief example in the comments. Your experience might help others recognize similar patterns in their own lives, patterns they may have overlooked or dismissed. This principle explains why some people seem naturally more attuned to inner guidance, while others struggle to hear it despite sincere effort. The difference often lies not in whether guidance is being offered to one person and not another, but in their developed capacity to recognize and trust it. Throughout history, wisdom traditions have understood this dynamic. Ancient spiritual texts often describe a progression from spiritual deafness to increasingly refined spiritual hearing. This progression wasn't about earning more divine communication, but developing greater sensitivity to what was already being offered. We see this pattern clearly in many spiritual narratives. When Samuel first heard divine guidance as a young boy, he didn't recognize it as such until Eli helped him understand what was happening. 1 Samuel 3. The voice had been speaking, but Samuel lacked the framework to recognize it properly. Similarly, in the Gospel accounts, the disciples often failed to recognize the significance of Jesus' words until later reflection brought understanding. This pattern suggests that guidance is not withheld from some while given to others, but rather that recognizing guidance is a capacity that develops through practice and proper orientation. How can we practically develop greater sensitivity to the guidance that's already speaking in our lives? Here are 3 approaches that people across different belief systems have found helpful. First, practice intentional quieting. Most spiritual traditions recognize that inner noise, anxiety, hurry, preoccupation, attachment to outcomes, makes deeper guidance difficult to discern. Regular practices that quiet this inner noise create space for subtler communication to be recognized. This might include meditation, contemplative prayer, mindful walking in nature, journaling, or simply dedicated times of unplugged silence. The specific practice matters less than the regular creation of inner quiet where deeper wisdom can be heard. Second, develop retrospective awareness. At the end of each day, take time to reflect on your experiences with questions like, where did I sense guidance today that I might have missed in the moment? Or, looking back, can I recognize wisdom that was offered but that I didn't fully appreciate at the time? This reflection trains your awareness to become more sensitive to how guidance typically manifests in your particular experience. Third, practice suspension of judgment. When impressions, insights, or unusual thoughts arise, practice holding them with openness rather than immediately dismissing or uncritically accepting them. Many people miss guidance because they filter it out through immediate judgment. That's just my imagination, or that couldn't be right. Learning to hold impressions in a space of curious attention allows for discernment without premature dismissal of potential guidance. I worked with a woman named Maya who had a successful career in finance but felt increasingly empty despite her achievements. She described herself as spiritually tone-deaf, unable to access the kind of inner guidance that might help her find greater meaning. Rather than suggesting she needed to somehow earn or extract guidance from a reluctant universe, I encouraged her to consider that guidance might already be speaking in ways she hadn't learned to recognize. We explored how her analytical training, while valuable, might be filtering out impressions that didn't come in logical, linear forms. Maya began a simple practice of sitting in silence for 15 minutes each morning, not trying to generate insights, but simply creating space where subtler communication might be noticed. She also began keeping a guidance journal, where she recorded impressions, dreams, recurring thoughts, and unexpected insights without immediately judging their source or validity. After several weeks, she was surprised to discover patterns emerging, recurring themes and impressions that, when viewed collectively, pointed toward a different professional direction that integrated her analytical skills with her long-abandoned interest in environmental sustainability. The guidance hadn't suddenly appeared. It had been present all along, in subtle impressions she had previously dismissed. As Maya described it, I realized I'd been treating guidance like a radio station that wasn't broadcasting, when actually I just hadn't tuned my receiver to the right frequency. Once I created space and suspended my analytical judgment long enough to really listen, I discovered the broadcast had been ongoing. Indeed, is there an area of your life where you've been waiting for guidance to arrive, when perhaps it's already speaking in ways you haven't yet learned to recognize? What might change if you shifted from trying to make guidance happen to creating conditions where you can better perceive what's already being offered? If you're comfortable, I invite you to say to yourself, I open myself to recognizing the guidance that's already available to me. This simple intention can begin shifting your orientation from straining to receive to learning to perceive. The first key to hearing guidance in your daily decisions is recognizing that wisdom is already speaking. When you shift from trying to generate guidance to learning to recognize it, you align with how deeper wisdom typically operates, becoming more receptive to the insights that can transform your decision-making. If this perspective offers you a helpful shift in how you think about guidance, consider sharing this video with someone who might be struggling to find direction in an important life decision. Sometimes a simple shift in approach can open new possibilities for clarity. Have you ever received what felt like clear guidance about a decision, only to later question that clarity when doubts arose or challenges appeared? Have you experienced the frustrating cycle of feeling certain one moment and confused the next, especially when facing significant life choices? This brings us to our second principle. Authentic guidance creates conviction through multiple streams of confirmation, not isolated experiences. A common misconception about inner guidance is that it should arrive as a single, dramatic revelation that eliminates all doubt. When this expectation isn't met, or when initial clarity fades in the face of obstacles, many people conclude either that they never received genuine guidance or that they somehow lost connection with it. However, throughout history, wisdom traditions have recognized that substantive guidance typically manifests through what we might call convergence, multiple confirming indicators that align to create a more durable conviction. Rather than a single dramatic sign, it's the confluence of various streams of confirmation that establishes direction that can withstand inevitable doubts and challenges. In the Christian tradition, this principle appears in passages like Deuteronomy 19:15, which establishes that important matters required confirmation from multiple witnesses. Jesus echoed this principle in Matthew 18:16. And early Christian communities applied it broadly as a discernment practice. But this wisdom isn't unique to Christianity. It appears across cultures as a recognition that significant guidance typically arrives through multiple channels rather than isolated experiences. Modern decision science affirms this approach. Research on complex decision-making shows that integrating multiple sources of information, analytical thinking, emotional intelligence, intuitive impressions, and external feedback typically leads to more robust decisions than relying on any single input alone. This convergence principle helps explain why some people maintain conviction about their direction even when facing significant obstacles, while others abandon their path at the first sign of resistance. Those who understand that authentic guidance typically creates conviction through multiple streams of confirmation have a more resilient foundation for their decisions. Have you noticed in your own experience how the most reliable guidance often came not through a single dramatic moment, but through a pattern of confirmations that collectively created compelling clarity? Or conversely, have you ever followed what seemed like a powerful, isolated impression, only to discover it led in an unwise direction? If you've experienced either pattern, the strength of multiple confirming streams, or the weakness of isolated impressions, consider sharing a brief reflection in the comments. Your experience might help others recognize the importance of convergence in their own discernment process. This principle appears throughout historical accounts of significant life directions. Martin Luther King Jr. described how his sense of calling to civil rights leadership wasn't established through a single moment of clarity, but through a convergence of inner conviction, scriptural reflection, community affirmation, and historical opportunity. Mother Teresa's work in Calcutta followed a similar pattern. An initial inspiration confirmed through spiritual counsel, organizational support, and the fruitfulness of early efforts. These patterns suggest that when making significant decisions, we should look for convergence rather than relying solely on isolated experiences, no matter how powerful they may seem in the moment. What might this convergence include? While the specific elements vary across different wisdom traditions and individual experience, several common streams tend to appear when guidance is authentic: inner peace or resonance, a sense of rightness that persists beyond initial excitement, alignment with established wisdom principles from trusted sources, confirmation through trusted community or mentors who know you well, synchronistic circumstances that seem to support the direction, practical, fruitfulness as initial steps are taken, persistent return of the same direction even after careful questioning. No single element from this list provides sufficient confirmation alone. But when multiple streams align, a compelling clarity often emerges that can withstand the inevitable doubts and challenges that accompany significant decisions. How can we practically apply this convergence principle to discerning guidance in everyday decisions? Here are 3 approaches that many have found helpful across different spiritual perspectives. First, intentionally seek multiple forms of confirmation rather than relying on a single impressive experience. When you believe you've received guidance about an important matter, deliberately explore how it aligns with trusted wisdom sources. Seek input from wise counselors who know you well, pay attention to relevant circumstances, and notice the fruit of initial small steps in that direction. This multifaceted approach creates a more reliable foundation than even the most powerful isolated impression. Second, develop patience in important decisions. Convergence typically requires time to emerge fully. Many people short-circuit the discernment process by demanding immediate, complete certainty. Instead, recognize that for significant decisions, multiple confirmations often emerge gradually as you remain open and attentive. Initial guidance is often an invitation to further exploration rather than a complete roadmap. Third, document the emerging pattern of confirmation. Keep a journal or record of the various ways guidance seems to be confirmed or challenged over time. This practice serves 2 purposes. It helps you recognize the pattern of convergence as it forms, and it provides a tangible reminder of the multiple confirmations when doubts inevitably arise later. I worked with a couple, David and Elena, who were considering a major career and location change that would impact their family significantly. Initially, Elena had a powerful spiritual experience during meditation that seemed to clearly direct them toward this move. David, though supportive, felt less certain about such a significant change based on a single experience, no matter how meaningful. Rather than either dismissing Elena's experience or moving forward based solely upon it, they decided to apply the convergence principle, remaining open to the possibility while watching for multiple streams of confirmation. They committed to a 3-month discernment period, discussing the potential move with trusted mentors, researching practical implications, taking small exploratory steps, and remaining attentive to how the direction either gained clarity or faded over time. What emerged surprised them both. Over those 3 months, multiple confirming streams appeared. Conversations with unrelated people who mentioned the same location without prompting, professional connections that unexpectedly formed in the prospective area, their children's surprising openness to the idea, and practical provisions that materialized without forced effort. No single confirmation would have been decisive, but the convergence of multiple streams created a compelling clarity that neither could deny. As David later reflected, I was skeptical of making such a major decision based on Elena's initial experience alone. But when we gave it time and remained open, the confirmation came through so many different channels that it created a conviction neither of us could have manufactured. When challenges arose during our transition, and they definitely did, that multifaceted confirmation gave us resilience that a single experience never could have provided. Is there a decision you're currently facing where you might be placing too much weight on either a single positive indication or a single discouraging factor? What would change if you adopted a more patient, multifaceted approach to discernment, remaining open while watching for patterns of convergence to emerge? If this approach resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, I'm willing to patiently watch for multiple streams of confirmation rather than demanding a single dramatic sign. Indeed, this intention can help shift your discernment process toward greater wisdom and resilience. If you're finding value in these principles, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might be navigating important decisions in their own lives. Sometimes, a new perspective on how guidance works can make all the difference in finding clarity amidst life's complexity. The second key to hearing guidance in your daily decisions is recognizing that authentic direction typically creates conviction through multiple streams of confirmation rather than isolated experiences. When you shift from seeking one dramatic sign to patiently watching for patterns of convergence, you align with how wisdom has been discerned across cultures and throughout history. Now let's explore our third principle, which addresses one of the most common obstacles to recognizing guidance in everyday life. Have you noticed how your ability to sense guidance seems to fluctuate dramatically? How sometimes clarity comes easily, while other times even basic decisions feel clouded and uncertain? Have you wondered why the same reflective practices that yield insight one day seem ineffective the next? Our third principle addresses this common experience. Inner noise is the primary barrier to recognizing guidance in daily decisions. This principle helps explain the inconsistency many people experience in their ability to discern guidance. The issue isn't that wisdom speaks clearly sometimes, but remains silent others. Rather, our internal noise level fluctuates, sometimes allowing us to hear the consistently speaking voice of deeper wisdom, and other times drowning it out completely. Spiritual traditions have long recognized this reality. In the Christian contemplative tradition, the Desert Fathers and Mothers spoke of achieving hesychia, inner stillness, as a prerequisite for discerning divine guidance. Buddhist practice emphasizes quieting the monkey mind to access deeper wisdom. Across traditions, the common insight emerges. External silence is helpful, but insufficient. It's internal noise that most significantly interferes with hearing the subtle voice of wisdom. Modern neuroscience offers intriguing parallels through research on the default mode network, DMN, and its relationship to insight and creativity. When the brain's DMN, associated with self-referential thinking, mind-wandering, and rumination, is overly active, it tends to inhibit the neural networks associated with creative insight and intuitive understanding. Essentially, a noisy inner environment neurologically inhibits access to the very brain states most associated with deeper wisdom and insight. This principle helps explain why retreat experiences often provide unusual clarity, not because wisdom suddenly becomes more available in retreat settings, but because these environments temporarily reduce the inner noise that normally interferes with recognizing the wisdom that's consistently available. Have you noticed in your own experience how guidance seems clearer when your mind is more settled? How solutions to problems often emerge, not when you're straining to figure them out, but when your thinking quiets, perhaps during a walk while showering or upon waking. These moments of mental quiet often allow wisdom that was previously drowned out by internal noise to rise to conscious awareness. If you've noticed this pattern in your own experience, consider sharing a brief example in the comments of how inner quiet has enhanced your ability to discern guidance. Your reflection might help others recognize similar patterns in their own lives. What creates this inner noise that interferes with guidance? While the specific forms vary across individuals, several common sources appear consistently. Anxiety generates mental static that makes it nearly impossible to distinguish the voice of wisdom from fear-based projections, like trying to hear a soft-spoken person in a room with a blaring alarm. Anxiety drowns out the subtle voice of deeper guidance. Hurry creates a frantic internal pace that misses the typically gentle promptings of wisdom. Henri Nouwen observed that a mind filled with urgency can neither perceive the presence of God nor hear the soft voice of the Spirit. Many miss guidance not because it's absent, but because their internal hurry rushes past it. Information overload floods our mental bandwidth with so much input that the quieter voice of wisdom gets lost in the deluge. Many struggle to hear guidance, not because they lack spiritual sensitivity, but because they've allowed their minds to become so saturated with constant content consumption that even earnest listening times are internally noisy. Attachment to outcomes creates perceptual bias that leads us to mistake our own preferences for genuine guidance. When we're intensely invested in a particular result, we tend to interpret any impression through that biased lens, missing guidance that might direct us differently. The common factor among these sources of noise is that they operate primarily within us, rather than externally. While external silence can certainly help create conditions conducive to hearing guidance, it's the reduction of internal noise that most significantly enhances our ability to discern wisdom in daily decisions. How can we practically reduce inner noise to enhance our recognition of guidance? Here are 3 approaches that people across different belief systems have found helpful. First, develop a consistent mind-quieting practice. Whether through centering prayer, mindfulness meditation, contemplative walking, or another approach aligned with your beliefs, establish a daily practice specifically designed to reduce your inner noise level. This isn't merely about external silence, though that helps, but about internal quieting, learning to notice and gently release anxious thoughts, pressing agendas, and mental chatter. Even short daily periods of intentional inner quieting can significantly enhance your ability to recognize guidance throughout the day. Second, practice regular digital detox. Schedule intentional breaks from the constant input of social media, news, entertainment, and even educational content. Many who struggle to hear guidance are simply suffering from spiritual hearing damage due to information overload. Consider establishing clear boundaries around media consumption. Perhaps no digital inputs before a certain time each morning, a full day unplugged each week, or regular input fasts where you temporarily disconnect from all media to allow your internal environment to settle. Third, develop the habit of pace-setting pauses throughout your day. Brief moments of intentional stillness, even 30 seconds to a minute, can interrupt the momentum of hurry that builds as your day progresses. Some find it helpful to use transitions between activities as pause triggers. Before starting the car, when entering a new space, before beginning a meeting, or after completing a task. These micro moments of inner quiet, scattered throughout your day, can maintain a lower noise level that enhances your ongoing ability to recognize guidance. I worked with a technology executive named James, who described himself as spiritually deaf, unable to access the kind of inner guidance he observed in some colleagues, despite his genuine desire for such wisdom. His attempts at traditional spiritual practices yielded little fruit, leaving him frustrated and increasingly skeptical about whether guidance was even available to someone like him. The breakthrough came when James recognized that his issue wasn't spiritual inadequacy, but extreme inner noise. His typical day began with checking email and news before even getting out of bed, continued with constantly toggling between tasks while streaming podcasts or videos for background, and ended with falling asleep to streaming content. Even his dedicated spiritual time was spent consuming more content, reading spiritual books, listening to teachings, or journaling his thoughts, without ever creating true inner quiet. James committed to a 30-day inner noise reduction experiment. He began each day with 20 minutes of simple, silent breathing practice before engaging with any content at all. He established firm boundaries around digital consumption, including no screens during meals and no inputs at least 1 hour before bed. Most significantly, he scheduled 3 two-hour blocks each week for extended silence. No inputs, no productive outputs, just being present with whatever arose internally. The transformation was remarkable. As his inner noise level decreased, his ability to recognize guidance dramatically increased. As James described it, I realized guidance hadn't been absent. I had just been living with the spiritual equivalent of standing next to a jet engine and wondering why I couldn't hear someone whispering. As the noise reduced, I began noticing subtle impressions, gentle nudges, and quiet insights that had probably been there all along, but were drowned out by my constantly noisy inner environment. Doctor, how would you rate your current inner noise level on a scale of 1 to 10? What specific sources of internal static, anxiety, hurry, information overload, attachment to outcomes might be interfering with your ability to recognize guidance in daily decisions? What one practical step could you take this week to begin reducing that inner noise? If you feel this would be helpful, consider saying to yourself, I recognize that inner noise may be preventing me from hearing guidance that's already available. I'm willing to take practical steps to create more internal quiet. This acknowledgement can be the first step toward enhancing your ability to discern wisdom in daily choices. The third key to hearing guidance in your daily decisions is recognizing that inner noise is the primary barrier to discernment. When you take practical steps to reduce internal static, whether from anxiety, hurry, information overload, or attachment to outcomes, you create conditions where the consistently available voice of wisdom can be more clearly recognized. And now, let's explore our fourth principle, which addresses a common misunderstanding that prevents many people from recognizing authentic guidance when it appears. Have you ever received what you believed was clear guidance about a decision, only to encounter unexpected difficulties after following it? Have you questioned your ability to discern wisdom because a seemingly right choice led to unforeseen challenges? Have you wondered why apparent guidance sometimes leads to more complications rather than fewer? Our fourth principle addresses this common confusion. Authentic guidance often leads through difficulty rather than around it. Many people operate under an unconscious assumption that if they're correctly discerning guidance, the resulting path will be relatively smooth and free from major obstacles. Conversely, they assume that if they encounter significant resistance or unexpected challenges after making a decision, they must have misunderstood the guidance. This assumption, while understandable, contradicts the wisdom of virtually every spiritual tradition, as well as the lived experience of those who have made historically significant contributions. Throughout history, those who have followed authentic guidance have routinely been led into, rather than around, significant difficulties, not despite the guidance, but because of it. These difficulties weren't evidence of having misheard, but were often essential aspects of the very purpose toward which they were being guided. This pattern appears across wisdom traditions. In the Bhagavad Gita, Arjuna receives guidance that leads him directly into the profound difficulties of battle, not away from them. In the Jewish tradition, Moses' guidance led the Israelites into 40 years of desert wandering, a journey filled with hardships that shaped them in ways prosperity never could have. In the Christian narrative, Jesus himself was led by the Spirit into direct confrontation with temptation in the wilderness and ultimately to the cross. Contemporary psychology offers an interesting parallel through research on post-traumatic growth. The finding that significant psychological and spiritual development often occurs not despite trauma and difficulty, but specifically through engaging with these challenges. What initially appears as an unfortunate detour often becomes central to the journey's ultimate purpose. This principle directly contradicts the popular assumption that correctly discerned guidance should produce a relatively smooth path. In fact, history suggests almost the opposite, that authentic guidance frequently leads through difficulties precisely because these challenges accomplish essential purposes that could not be achieved through easier routes. Have you experienced a time when following what you believed was genuine guidance led you into unexpected difficulties that ultimately proved valuable? Or conversely, have you abandoned what might have been authentic guidance simply because the path became more challenging than expected? If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on a time when difficulties that initially seemed to contradict guidance eventually revealed their purpose. Your experience might encourage others currently questioning guidance because of unexpected challenges. This principle helps explain why some people abandon genuinely wise directions when the resulting journey becomes difficult. Having unconsciously embraced the false assumption that the right path should be relatively smooth, they conclude they must have misunderstood when significant obstacles arise. This faulty assumption creates a dangerous vulnerability in their discernment, one that causes them to abandon authentic guidance precisely when perseverance is most needed. Even in secular contexts, this pattern is widely recognized. Steve Jobs noted that the ones who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do, precisely because they persist through the inevitable difficulties rather than interpreting challenges as evidence they're on the wrong path. Similarly, research on entrepreneurial success consistently shows that perseverance through difficulties, grit, is more predictive of eventual success than initial conditions or advantages. Across spiritual traditions, we find similar wisdom. The Tao Te Ching observes that a good traveler has no fixed plans and is not intent on arriving, recognizing that the journey's purpose often reveals itself through its unexpected turns and challenges. In the Christian tradition, James writes, "Consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. Let perseverance finish its work so that you may be mature and complete, not lacking anything." These diverse perspectives converge on a common insight. Difficulties don't invalidate guidance, but are often integral to its purpose. The challenges aren't evidence of having misheard, but are frequently the very means through which the guidance accomplishes its deeper aims. How can we practically apply this understanding to become better at recognizing and following authentic guidance, even when it leads through difficulty? Here are 3 approaches that many have found helpful across different perspectives. First, examine your unconscious expectations about guidance. Ask yourself honestly, do I unconsciously expect that correctly discerned guidance should lead to a relatively smooth path? Bringing this assumption into consciousness allows you to consciously realign your expectations with the more realistic pattern, where guidance often leads through difficulties rather than around them. Second, develop resilience practices that support perseverance through challenges. Since authentic guidance often leads through difficulty, spiritual and psychological preparation for challenges becomes an essential aspect of the discernment journey. Practices might include regular reflection on past growth through difficulties, creating supportive community that encourages perseverance, or developing specific spiritual disciplines that sustain hope and perspective during challenging seasons. Third, adopt a longer-term perspective on discernment evaluation. Rather than immediately questioning guidance when difficulties arise, establish a practice of more extended reflection that allows the larger pattern and purpose to emerge. This might include journaling about how your understanding of the guidance's purpose evolves over time, regular conversations with wise mentors who can offer perspective beyond your immediate experience, or scheduled guidance reviews at 3 months, 6 months, and 1 year after significant decisions. I worked with a healthcare professional, Sophia, who had received what she believed was clear guidance to leave her established practice and start an innovative wellness center serving an underserved community. The direction had been confirmed through multiple streams: inner peace about the decision despite its risks, strong affirmation from trusted mentors, remarkable synchronistic opportunities that opened initial doors, and deep alignment with her sense of life purpose. Yet within months of launching the center, everything seemed to fall apart. Financial projections proved overly optimistic. Key partnerships dissolved unexpectedly. Regulatory hurdles emerged that hadn't been anticipated. Sophia's health suffered under the stress. By every external measure, the venture appeared to be failing, and with it, her confidence in her ability to discern guidance crumbled. When Sophia sought counsel, she was questioning everything. Did I completely misunderstand the guidance? Is my discernment fundamentally flawed? Should I immediately cut my losses and try to return to my former position? Rather than reinforcing these doubts, I encouraged Sophia to consider that authentic guidance often leads through difficulty rather than around it. We revisited the clear confirmation pattern she had received and acknowledged that temporary challenges didn't necessarily invalidate genuine guidance. Instead of abandoning her direction, she recommitted to it with more realistic expectations about the journey, looking for purpose within the challenges rather than assuming the challenges proved she had misheard. Over the next 2 years, remarkable transformation occurred, though not in the way Sophia had initially envisioned. The financial constraints forced creative approaches that actually made services more accessible to the very communities she most wanted to reach. The dissolved partnerships created space for more aligned collaborations that eventually emerged. The regulatory challenges led to advocacy work that changed policies affecting similar centers across the region. What initially appeared to be failure gradually revealed itself as a necessary reshaping of Sophia's vision, not an abandonment of it. As she later reflected, I almost gave up on genuine guidance because I expected the path to be easier than it was. Once I understood that guidance often intentionally leads through difficulties rather than around them, I stopped questioning the guidance and started looking for its purpose within the challenges. That shift changed everything. Is there a situation in your life where you've been questioning whether you correctly discerned guidance because the resulting journey has been more difficult than expected? How might your perspective shift if you considered that the difficulties may be integral to the guidance's purpose, rather than evidence that you misheard? If this perspective resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, I recognize that authentic guidance often leads through difficulty rather than around it. I'm willing to persevere through challenges while remaining open to how the purpose might be unfolding in unexpected ways. This intention can transform how you respond to difficulties that emerge after following what you believe to be genuine guidance. The fourth key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is understanding that authentic wisdom often leads through difficulty rather than around it. When challenges arise after following what seemed like clear direction, these difficulties don't necessarily invalidate the guidance, but may be integral to its deeper purpose. This understanding helps you persevere through the very challenges that might otherwise cause you to abandon genuine guidance prematurely. If you found this principle insightful for your own journey, consider sharing this video with someone who might be questioning guidance they've received because of unexpected difficulties that followed their decision. Your simple act of sharing might provide exactly the perspective they need to persevere through challenges toward a purpose that has yet to fully reveal itself. Now let's explore our fifth principle, which addresses a common misconception that prevents many people from recognizing authentic guidance in their everyday experience. Have you noticed that sometimes guidance comes as a gentle nudge rather than a dramatic revelation? Have you questioned whether subtle impressions could really be significant guidance, or whether you're just projecting your own thoughts? Have you wondered how to distinguish between ordinary mental activity and the subtle voice of deeper wisdom? Our fifth principle offers crucial insight. Authentic guidance often speaks through subtle impressions rather than dramatic interventions. Many people struggle to recognize guidance because they're expecting it to arrive in dramatic, unmistakable forms, burning bushes, audible voices, or overwhelming emotional experiences that eliminate all uncertainty. When guidance instead comes through subtle impressions, gentle nudges, or quiet insights, they question whether they're experiencing genuine guidance at all. This expectation for dramatic manifestations contradicts the consistent testimony of wisdom traditions and the lived experience of those who have demonstrated exceptional discernment. Across diverse spiritual perspectives, there's remarkable agreement that while dramatic experiences occasionally occur, the more common pattern involves subtle, easily missed impressions that require attentiveness to recognize. In the Jewish mystical tradition, the prophet Elijah discovered that divine presence came not through wind, earthquake, or fire, but through a still, small voice, or the sound of gentle stillness. The Quaker tradition emphasizes attending to the still, small voice within. Buddhist practice focuses on subtle shifts in awareness that emerge through patient attention. Across traditions, the common recognition appears. Profound guidance often comes not through dramatic intervention, but through subtle impression. Modern psychological research offers interesting parallels through studies on intuitive decision-making and the adaptive unconscious. These studies consistently show that the mind processes vast amounts of information below the threshold of consciousness, occasionally surfacing insights and impressions that represent complex pattern recognition rather than merely subjective imagination. This understanding helps explain why many people fail to recognize guidance despite its presence in their experience. Expecting dramatic manifestations, they overlook the subtle impressions through which guidance most commonly arrives. Like someone waiting for a shout who misses a whisper, they remain unaware of the direction being offered because it comes in a form they're not attuned to recognize. Have you experienced moments when following a subtle impression or seemingly minor insight ultimately led to significant positive outcomes? Or conversely, have you dismissed subtle nudges that later proved to be the guidance you were seeking? If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on a time when guidance came through a subtle impression rather than a dramatic experience. Your story might help others recognize similar patterns in their own lives that they've been overlooking. This principle reveals why many sincere seekers struggle to recognize guidance despite its presence in their experience. They scrutinize their dramatic spiritual experiences, which may indeed sometimes contain guidance, while overlooking the subtle impressions through which wisdom more routinely speaks. This pattern appears throughout the historical record. Teresa of Avila, while known for some dramatic mystical experiences, primarily emphasized locutiones, subtle interior impressions that came without noise of words. Gandhi described his guidance as the small, still voice that all of us hear from time to time. Modern exemplars like Mother Teresa consistently reported not dramatic visions, but subtle interior certainty that emerged gradually through patient attention. The Zen tradition captures this reality through the saying, "Before enlightenment, chop wood, carry water. After enlightenment, chop wood, carry water." The external appearance remains ordinary, but the internal experience of guidance becomes increasingly clear through practiced attention to subtle shifts in awareness. This principle doesn't deny that dramatic guidance experiences can occur. Across traditions, we find accounts of powerful visions, dreams, synchronicities, or sudden revelations that provided direction. But these dramatic experiences are consistently described as the exception rather than the rule, unusual moments that punctuate a more common pattern of subtle guidance that requires attentive discernment. How can we become more attuned to the subtle impressions through which guidance often speaks? Here are 3 practices that people across different spiritual perspectives have found helpful in developing this sensitivity. First, cultivate daily attentiveness to subtle impressions, rather than dismissing gentle nudges, recurring thoughts, or quiet insights as just your imagination. Develop the habit of noting these subtle experiences without immediately judging their significance. Many find it helpful to keep a guidance journal where they record these impressions without initially trying to determine their source or importance. Over time, patterns often emerge that reveal which types of subtle impressions typically prove meaningful in your particular experience. Second, practice the pause of discernment. When subtle impressions arise, whether as gentle thoughts, quiet inclinations, or mild emotional shifts, develop the habit of pausing briefly to give them space, rather than immediately continuing with your mental activity. This brief pause allows subtle guidance that might otherwise be quickly forgotten to register more fully in your awareness. Some find it helpful to use the language of noting, simply mentally acknowledging impression arising when they sense a subtle nudge, creating space for it to be recognized more clearly. Third, engage in regular reflection on past guidance. Set aside time periodically to review your experience, looking specifically for instances when subtle impressions prove to be significant guidance. This retrospective practice gradually trains your awareness to recognize the particular qualities that distinguish meaningful impressions from ordinary mental activity in your unique experience. Many discover that authentic guidance has a distinct feel or quality that becomes more recognizable through this kind of intentional reflection. I worked with a business leader, Michael, who described himself as spiritually tone-deaf. Though he valued the concept of inner guidance, he rarely experienced what he considered genuine direction, despite sincere efforts through meditation, prayer, and contemplative practices. He particularly envied colleagues who described dramatic spiritual experiences that provided clear direction for major decisions. Through our conversations, it became clear that Michael was overlooking a consistent pattern of subtle impressions in his experience. Gentle nudges to contact certain people, quiet thoughts to explore particular directions, or mild shifts in his sense of peace around specific options. Because these impressions lacked the drama he associated with real guidance, he habitually dismissed them as merely his own thoughts. I suggested a simple experiment. For 1 month, Michael would record these subtle impressions in a journal without immediately judging their significance. He would then take small, low-risk actions on some of these nudges, simply to explore whether they led in fruitful directions. The results surprised him. What began as seemingly random, subtle impressions gradually revealed a consistent pattern of guidance that, when followed, repeatedly led to unexpected opportunities, helpful connections, and wise decisions. One particularly mundane impression, a recurring thought to contact a former colleague, led to a transformative business partnership that neither could have anticipated. As Michael reflected on this experience, he realized that guidance had been present throughout his life, not in the dramatic forms he'd been seeking, but in the subtle impressions he had habitually dismissed. As he described it, "I was waiting for a spiritual lightning bolt while ignoring the consistent stream of subtle nudges that actually contained the guidance I needed. Once I began taking these quieter impressions seriously, I discovered they contained wisdom far beyond my conscious reasoning." And are there subtle impressions in your own experience that you might be dismissing because they don't match your expectations for how significant guidance should appear? What seemingly minor nudges, quiet thoughts, or gentle inclinations have you experienced recently that might deserve more attentive consideration? If this perspective resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, "I'm willing to pay more attention to subtle impressions rather than waiting only for dramatic guidance." I recognize that profound wisdom often speaks through gentle nudges that are easily overlooked. This intention can open your awareness to guidance that may have been present all along but unrecognized because of its subtle nature. If you're finding these principles about guidance helpful in your own journey, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might benefit from these insights. Sometimes a simple shift in understanding how wisdom typically operates can make all the difference in recognizing the guidance that's already available. The fifth key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is understanding that it often arrives through subtle impressions rather than dramatic interventions. When you develop attentiveness to gentle nudges, quiet insights, and mild shifts in your inner experience, you become receptive to how wisdom most commonly speaks in everyday life. Now let's explore our sixth principle, which addresses one of the most persistent challenges in discerning authentic guidance, distinguishing genuine wisdom from our own preferences, fears, or wishful thinking. Have you struggled to differentiate between authentic guidance and your own desires or fears? Have you wondered whether what feels like guidance is simply your own thinking in disguise? Have you noticed that sometimes what presents as guidance seems suspiciously aligned with what you wanted anyway? Our sixth principle offers essential clarity. Authentic guidance can be distinguished from personal preference through consistent patterns of discernment. This principle addresses perhaps the most persistent challenge in recognizing guidance: how to distinguish the voice of deeper wisdom from our own preferences, projections, fears, or wishful thinking. This question troubles sincere seekers across every tradition and worldview, from the most devoutly religious to those with more informal spiritual perspectives. Wisdom traditions consistently acknowledge this challenge, while suggesting that authentic guidance can indeed be distinguished from personal projection, not through a single foolproof test, but through recognizing consistent patterns that indicate genuine guidance versus self-generated thoughts. While specific descriptions vary across traditions, remarkable convergence appears around certain distinguishing patterns. Authentic guidance typically challenges our default tendencies rather than merely confirming them, maintains consistency over time rather than shifting with our moods, often contradicts our immediate preferences while aligning with our deeper values, brings increasing clarity through reflection rather than diminishing upon examination, generates lasting peace, even when pointing toward difficulty, bears good fruit when followed, even if not immediately. By contrast, guidance that primarily reflects our own projections typically consistently aligns with our preferences and confirms existing biases, shifts in response to our emotional states or external influences, often flatters our ego or justifies what we wanted to do anyway, diminishes under careful reflection and examination, produces temporary emotional comfort but not lasting peace, bears mixed or poor fruit when followed, even if initially appealing. This pattern recognition approach acknowledges the complexity of discernment without surrendering to complete subjectivity. It suggests that while no single experience provides absolute certainty, the cumulative pattern of our discernment across time creates increasing clarity about what constitutes authentic guidance in our particular experience. Contemporary psychology offers interesting parallels through research on metacognition, our ability to examine our own thinking processes. Studies show that with intentional practice, people can become significantly better at distinguishing between different types of internal mental events, developing what researchers call metacognitive awareness that allows for more nuanced recognition of different cognitive and emotional processes. Have you noticed certain patterns that help you distinguish authentic guidance from your own preferences or projections? Have you developed personal tests that help you recognize when wisdom is speaking versus when your own desires are masquerading as guidance? If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on how you distinguish genuine guidance from your own thinking. Your discernment practices might offer valuable perspective to others, developing their own approach to this universal challenge. This principle explains why some people develop remarkable clarity and discernment, while others remain perpetually confused about whether they're hearing authentic guidance or merely their own thoughts. The difference often lies not in having dramatic spiritual experiences, but in developing attentive discernment of the patterns that distinguish genuine guidance from personal projection. Throughout history, those noted for exceptional discernment typically describe not a single dramatic ability, but a patient process of learning these distinguishing patterns through experience. Thomas Merton wrote about developing the ability to recognize authentic guidance as a kind of spiritual sensation, acquired only through experience, trial and error. The Quaker tradition emphasizes testing impressions both individually and communally to discern their authentic source. Ignatius of Loyola developed sophisticated discernment practices focused on recognizing the distinctive patterns of genuine guidance versus self-generated thoughts. These diverse approaches converge on a common recognition. Discernment is a learned skill developed through intentional practice and reflection on experience, not an automatic ability or merely a matter of emotional intensity. How can we develop greater clarity in distinguishing authentic guidance from our own projections? Here are 3 approaches that people across different spiritual perspectives have found helpful in refining this crucial discernment. First, develop awareness of your typical patterns of self-deception. We all have characteristic ways we tend to mistake our own preferences for guidance, common blind spots in our discernment. Some consistently confuse emotional intensity with spiritual authenticity. Others habitually interpret guidance in ways that avoid difficult conversations. Still others regularly mistake their intellectual analysis for deeper wisdom. By identifying your particular patterns of self-deception, you can become more alert to these specific vulnerabilities in your discernment. Second, establish regular practices of testing impressions. Rather than accepting initial impressions as definitive guidance, develop habits of examining them through multiple lenses. How does this align with trusted wisdom sources? How does it look after a night's sleep? How does it appear when I imagine explaining it to someone I deeply respect? Does it pass the deathbed perspective test? Would I feel this was wise guidance when looking back at the end of my life? These testing practices help surface self-deception that might otherwise remain hidden. Third, engage trusted companions in your discernment process. Our self-deception is often most visible to others who know us well. By including wise friends, mentors, or spiritual companions in your discernment, particularly those who have demonstrated good discernment themselves and who aren't afraid to challenge you, you create an important safeguard against mistaking your own preferences for authentic guidance. I worked with a nonprofit leader, Rebecca, who faced a major decision about whether to expand her organization's work internationally. She had experienced what felt like clear guidance toward expansion during several powerful moments of contemplative prayer, guidance that aligned perfectly with her longtime dream of creating a global organization. However, Rebecca had previously made decisions based on what later proved to be her own preferences disguised as guidance, with painful consequences. She was determined not to repeat this pattern, so she engaged in a thorough discernment process, specifically designed to distinguish authentic guidance from her own projections. First, she journaled extensively about her known patterns of self-deception, identifying a particular tendency to mistake excitement about new possibilities for genuine guidance. Second, she established specific testing practices, including revisiting the guidance after deliberately contemplating worst-case scenarios for expansion, examining it after focusing on the organization's current local impact, and reflecting on it from the perspective of those most affected by the decision. Finally, she invited honest input from 3 trusted advisors known for their discernment and their willingness to challenge her thinking. Through this process, Rebecca gradually recognized that what initially felt like clear guidance toward expansion actually diminished under careful examination rather than growing clearer. The excitement faded when confronted with practical implications. Trusted advisors consistently expressed concerns that resonated with her own deeper unease. And when she honestly examined her motivation, she recognized that her desire for organizational growth was partly driven by ego needs rather than authentic calling. What emerged instead was a different direction, not dramatic international expansion, but strategic deepening of the organization's existing work, with careful development of replicable models that others might eventually implement in different contexts. This direction initially felt less exciting, but grew increasingly clear and peaceful as she continued testing it through various discernment practices. As Rebecca later reflected, what I initially took for guidance was really my own ambitious preference wearing spiritual clothing. But by engaging in practices specifically designed to distinguish authentic guidance from my projections, a different and wiser path emerged, one that has proven far more fruitful and aligned with our true calling than the exciting but premature expansion I initially mistook for guidance. Are there decisions you are currently facing where you might be mistaking your own preferences or fears for authentic guidance? What specific practices might help you distinguish more clearly between genuine wisdom and your own projections in these particular situations? If this approach resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, I recognize that distinguishing authentic guidance from my own preferences requires intentional discernment practices. I'm willing to test impressions carefully, rather than assuming my initial sense is necessarily accurate guidance. This commitment to careful discernment creates essential protection against one of the most common pitfalls in recognizing genuine wisdom. The sixth key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is developing consistent practices for distinguishing authentic wisdom from your own preferences, fears, or projections. When you approach discernment not as a single event, but as an ongoing process of pattern recognition, you gradually develop greater clarity about when deeper wisdom is speaking versus when you're hearing primarily your own thoughts. If you're finding value in these principles about discerning guidance, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might benefit from these insights. Your engagement helps these perspectives reach those who are seeking greater clarity in their own decision-making processes. Now, let's explore our seventh principle, which addresses a dimension of guidance that many overlook entirely in their quest for wisdom in daily decisions. Have you noticed that guidance sometimes comes not as specific direction, but as a quality of presence that transforms how you experience your circumstances? Have you wondered about the relationship between seeking specific guidance for decisions and cultivating a more consistent sense of being guided in daily life? Have you experienced moments when the question shifted from "what should I do" to "how am I being invited to be present in this situation"? Our seventh principle illuminates this often overlooked dimension. Authentic guidance manifests not just as specific direction, but as transformed presence within circumstances. Many people approach guidance exclusively as specific direction for particular decisions, essentially asking, "What should I do?" in discrete situations. While this specific direction is certainly one important dimension of guidance, wisdom traditions consistently point to a deeper manifestation, a quality of transformed presence within circumstances that changes how we experience and engage with whatever situation we face. This distinction appears across spiritual perspectives. The Christian contemplative tradition speaks of the indwelling spirit that transforms how believers experience their circumstances from within. Buddhist practice emphasizes right presence as the foundation for right action. The Stoic tradition focuses on developing an internal quality that remains constant regardless of external conditions. Across these diverse approaches, a common insight emerges. Guidance manifests not only as external direction, but as internal transformation. Contemporary psychology offers parallels through concepts like psychological flexibility and mindful presence, qualities that don't determine specific actions, but transform how we engage with whatever circumstances we encounter. Research shows that these qualities often predict positive outcomes more reliably than specific behavioral strategies alone. This principle explains why some people maintain a sense of being guided, even in circumstances where no clear directive is apparent. Rather than experiencing the absence of specific direction as divine silence or abandonment, they recognize that guidance continues to operate through a quality of presence that transforms how they experience and engage with uncertainty itself. Have you experienced moments when guidance came not primarily as specific direction, but as a quality of presence that transformed how you experienced your circumstances? Times when the primary question shifted from, "What exactly should I do?" to, "How am I being invited to be present in this situation?" If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on an experience where guidance manifested as transformed presence rather than merely specific direction. Your story might help others recognize this dimension of guidance in their own experience. This principle addresses the common frustration many people feel when facing situations where no clear directive seems forthcoming despite sincere seeking. Often in these circumstances, guidance is still operating, not by providing a specific roadmap, but by offering a quality of presence that transforms how we experience and engage with the very uncertainty that troubles us. Throughout history, those noted for exceptional spiritual wisdom often emphasize this dimension of guidance. Brother Lawrence wrote about practicing the presence of God in even the most mundane tasks, a quality of awareness that transformed how he experienced his circumstances from within. Thich Nhat Hanh emphasized that the way out is in, that transformation of presence precedes and informs wise action. Etty Hillesum, writing from a Nazi concentration camp, described how an internal quality of presence became her primary experience of guidance, even in the most horrific external circumstances. These diverse voices point to a common recognition. Guidance doesn't operate only by telling us what to do, but by transforming who we are as we do whatever circumstances require. This transformed presence then naturally gives rise to wise action appropriate to the situation at hand. How can we cultivate greater awareness of this dimension of guidance in our daily experience? Here are 3 approaches that people across different spiritual perspectives have found helpful in recognizing and developing this quality of transformed presence. First, practice asking the being question alongside the doing question. When seeking guidance in any situation, deliberately complement the natural question, "What should I do?" with the equally important, "How am I being invited to be present in this situation?" This simple practice helps expand awareness beyond just direction to the quality of presence that often constitutes guidance's primary operation in daily experience. Second, develop regular practices that cultivate qualities of presence rather than just seeking specific direction. Whether through contemplative prayer, mindfulness meditation, centering practices, or other approaches aligned with your beliefs, establish rhythms that nurture the inner qualities that transform how you experience circumstances from within. These practices develop the soil from which specific guidance naturally grows in its appropriate season. Third, pay attention to subtle shifts in your quality of presence during daily activities. Notice when you experience unusual peace despite challenging circumstances, unexpected compassion in difficult relationships, or surprising patience in frustrating situations. These subtle shifts in quality of presence often represent guidance operating at a foundational level, transforming how you experience reality from within rather than merely directing specific actions. I worked with a physician, Thomas, who faced an unusually challenging period in his practice. Increasing administrative burdens, staffing shortages, and complex patient needs created a perfect storm of stress and uncertainty. As a person of deep faith, Thomas had always valued guidance in his decisions, but during this period, despite sincere seeking, he experienced what felt like divine silence regarding what specific actions to take. This apparent absence of direction troubled Thomas deeply, leading him to question whether he was somehow failing spiritually or missing obvious guidance. Our conversations explored the possibility that guidance might be operating in a different dimension during this season, not primarily a specific direction about what to do, but as a quality of presence that would transform how he experienced his challenging circumstances. Thomas began intentionally shifting his attention from seeking specific answers to cultivating qualities of presence, practicing brief, centering prayers between patients, paying attention to his breathing during stressful moments, and intentionally releasing his grip on outcomes at the beginning of each day. He complemented his natural question, "What should I do about these challenges?" with the equally important, "How am I being invited to be present in these circumstances?" Gradually, Thomas began noticing subtle but significant shifts, moments of unexpected peace amid administrative chaos, unusual patience with difficult patients, and surprising creativity in addressing staffing challenges. None of these experiences told him exactly what to do, but they transformed how he experienced his circumstances from within. This transformed presence then naturally gave rise to wiser actions that emerged organically from a changed inner state. As Thomas later reflected, "I was looking for guidance to give me an escape route from my circumstances, but what I received instead was even more valuable, a transformed way of being present within those same circumstances." This shift in presence then naturally changed how I responded to situations in ways that specific directions alone never could have accomplished. I discovered that guidance was operating all along, just in a dimension I hadn't been attentive to before. Nada, are there situations in your life where you've been seeking specific direction without receiving clear answers? How might your experience change if you complemented the question, "What should I do?" with equal attention to, "How am I being invited to be present in this situation?" What qualities of presence might constitute guidance operating at a more fundamental level than specific direction? If this perspective resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, "I recognize that guidance operates not only through specific direction, but also through transforming how I am present within my circumstances. I'm willing to pay attention to this dimension of guidance alongside my natural desire for specific answers." This expanded awareness opens you to recognizing guidance that may be operating in ways you've previously overlooked. The seventh key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is understanding that it manifests not only as specific direction, but also as transformed presence within circumstances. When you expand your attention beyond just seeking answers about what to do, you become receptive to how wisdom operates through transforming who you are as you face whatever circumstances life presents. As we continue to explore these principles, I invite you to share this message with others who might benefit from a deeper understanding of how guidance operates in everyday life. Sometimes the perspective that transforms our own experience becomes a gift we can offer to those on similar journeys. Now let's explore our eighth principle, which addresses a core misunderstanding that prevents many people from recognizing authentic guidance, even when it's directly available to them. Have you noticed that guidance sometimes comes not in the form you expected or preferred? Have you overlooked direction because it didn't match your preconceptions about how wisdom should manifest? Have you wondered why guidance sometimes seems absent when others suggest it might actually be present but in unrecognized forms? Our eighth principle addresses this common blind spot. Authentic guidance often comes in unexpected forms that require openness to recognize. Many people miss guidance not because it's absent, but because it arrives in forms they aren't expecting or don't initially recognize as guidance. Having conscious or unconscious expectations about how wisdom should manifest, they overlook direction that doesn't fit these preconceptions, concluding that guidance is absent when it's actually present, but in unrecognized forms. This principle appears consistently across wisdom traditions. In Jewish narratives, divine guidance frequently arrived through unexpected channels. burning bushes, talking donkeys, or apparent strangers who turned out to be messengers. The Christian Gospels repeatedly emphasize how Jesus' guidance came in forms that religious authorities failed to recognize because it didn't match their expectations. Buddhist teachings emphasize that wisdom often appears as the stone rejected by the builders that turns out to be the cornerstone. Contemporary psychology offers parallels through research on change blindness and expectation bias, our tendency to literally not see what contradicts our existing mental models or expectations. Studies show that people regularly fail to notice even dramatic changes in their environment when those changes don't align with their expectations of what they should be seeing. This principle helps explain why sincere seekers often experience what feels like an absence of guidance, despite its actual presence in their lives. Looking for wisdom to manifest in particular expected forms, perhaps dramatic spiritual experiences, clear inner voices, or specific types of synchronicities, they miss guidance that's arriving through unexpected channels like ordinary conversations, apparent coincidences, subtle physical sensations, or even their own seemingly random thoughts. Have you experienced times when you later realized guidance had been present, but in forms you initially didn't recognize or expect? Moments when what you dismissed as coincidence, random thought, or ordinary interaction later proved to be precise direction for your situation. If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on an experience where guidance came in an unexpected form that you almost overlooked. Your story might help others become more attentive to unrecognized guidance in their own lives. This principle addresses a particular vulnerability in how many people approach discernment. Having often unconscious templates for how genuine guidance should appear, they filter out impressions that don't match these expectations, creating artificial narrowing in their receptivity to wisdom that might arrive through diverse channels. Throughout history, stories of significant guidance often include elements of initial misrecognition precisely because the direction came in unexpected forms. Joseph initially saw his brother's betrayal as disaster rather than the unlikely path toward his divine appointment in Egypt. Paul viewed his imprisonment as a ministry setback until it became the context for writing letters that would shape Christianity for millennia. The restrictive, shelter-in-place experience of 2020 that initially appeared as pure limitation became for many a profound guidance towards simpler, more intentional living. These narratives suggest that guidance regularly arrives through channels we wouldn't consciously select or initially recognize as vehicles for wisdom. This unexpected quality isn't accidental, but often essential to the transformative nature of genuine guidance, which frequently needs to circumvent our existing frameworks to catalyze genuine growth. How can we develop greater openness to guidance in whatever forms it might appear? Here are 3 approaches that people across different spiritual perspectives have found helpful in expanding their receptivity to unexpected manifestations of wisdom. First, practice conscious suspension of expectations about how guidance should appear. Regularly ask yourself, what preconceptions might I have about how guidance should manifest in this situation? By bringing these expectations into awareness, you create space to recognize direction that doesn't fit your unconscious templates. Some find it helpful to explicitly pray or set intention to receive wisdom in whatever form it comes, deliberately releasing attachment to particular manifestations. Second, develop the habit of asking the guidance question in retrospect. Where might guidance have been operating that I didn't recognize in the moment? This reflective practice gradually trains awareness to recognize less obvious channels through which wisdom regularly arrives. Many people discover recurring patterns of guidance that were consistently present but overlooked because they appeared through unexpected vehicles. Third, intentionally expand your guidance vocabulary by learning how others experience direction in their lives. Read broadly about how people across different traditions and perspectives recognize wisdom in daily experience. Conversations with those who seem to navigate life with unusual discernment can be particularly valuable for expanding your understanding of the diverse forms guidance might take. I worked with a business executive, Sophia, who had developed sophisticated practices for seeking guidance in major decisions, but found herself in a prolonged period where traditional approaches yielded no clear direction regarding an important career transition. Despite contemplative practice, journaling, trusted counsel, and sincere prayer, the clarity she sought remained elusive, leaving her frustrated and increasingly anxious as her decision timeline grew shorter. In our conversations, we explored whether guidance might be present, but in forms she wasn't recognizing due to preconceptions about how direction should manifest in significant decisions. Sophia realized she had unconsciously developed very specific expectations. She anticipated guidance would come through a sense of profound peace about one option, clear inner knowing, or unmistakable external confirmation. These narrow expectations created filters that potentially screened out wisdom, arriving through different channels. Sophia began intentionally expanding her receptivity, consciously releasing her grip on how guidance should appear. She started paying attention to subtle physical sensations when considering options, began noting seemingly random thoughts or mental images that arose around the decision, and became more attentive to ordinary conversations for potentially significant insights. What emerged surprised her. Guidance regarding her career transition wasn't coming through the profound peace or clear knowing she expected, but through subtle energy shifts she noticed when exploring different options. Consistently, when considering one particular direction, she experienced an unusual sense of lightness and energy despite its practical challenges. This subtle physical response wasn't what she would have consciously selected as a guidance channel, but its consistency became increasingly difficult to dismiss. As Sophia began taking exploratory steps in this direction, additional confirmation emerged through channels she would have previously overlooked. A seemingly random book recommendation that addressed her specific situation, insights from a conversation with a stranger on a flight, and even a recurring dream that initially seemed unrelated to her decision but contained relevant symbolic guidance when carefully examined. As Sophia later reflected, I was missing guidance, not because it was absent, but because it wasn't coming in the forms I expected or would have chosen. Once I expanded my receptivity beyond my preconceptions about how direction should manifest, I began recognizing wisdom that had been present all along, but in channels I had been unconsciously filtering out. What initially felt like divine silence turned out to be more like my own selective hearing. Ndil. Are there situations in your life where you've been experiencing what feels like an absence of guidance? How might your experience change if you expanded your receptivity beyond your conscious or unconscious expectations about how wisdom should manifest? What unexpected channels might you have been overlooking as potential vehicles for the direction you seek? If this perspective resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, I recognize that guidance often comes in forms I might not expect or initially recognize. I'm willing to expand my receptivity beyond my preconceptions about how wisdom should manifest. This intention creates space to recognize direction that might be present but in unexpected forms that your current templates would otherwise filter out. The eighth key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is understanding that wisdom often arrives in unexpected forms that require openness to recognize. When you expand your receptivity beyond preconceptions about how guidance should manifest, you become able to recognize direction that might be continuously offered, but through channels you've been unconsciously filtering out. If you're finding these insights helpful for your own journey of discernment, please consider liking this video and sharing it with others who might benefit from a broader understanding of how guidance operates. Your engagement helps these perspectives reach those who are seeking greater clarity in their own decision-making. Now, let's explore our ninth principle, which addresses a dimension of guidance that many modern people find particularly challenging to integrate into their understanding of wise decision-making. Have you wondered about the relationship between rational analysis and more intuitive or spiritual forms of guidance? Have you felt tension between your analytical thinking and what seems like guidance from a deeper source? Have you struggled to integrate these seemingly different approaches to decision-making? Our ninth principle offers an integrative perspective. Authentic guidance integrates rational wisdom with intuitive knowing rather than separating them. Many people experience an artificial dichotomy in their approach to decision-making, treating rational analysis and more intuitive or spiritual guidance as separate, sometimes competing approaches. This false separation often forces an either-or choice. Either follow analytical reasoning or trust intuitive guidance, as if these were inherently contradictory paths. This dichotomy contradicts the integrated approach found across wisdom traditions. The Jewish concept of Chokhmah, wisdom, encompasses both analytical understanding and spiritual insight as complementary dimensions of a unified wisdom. The Christian tradition speaks of loving God with all your mind, alongside heart, soul, and strength, an integrated approach rather than competing faculties. Buddhist practice emphasizes the integration of analytical meditation with intuitive awareness, rather than separating these capacities. Contemporary neuroscience offers interesting parallels through research on the complementary functions of different brain networks. Studies increasingly suggest that optimal decision-making involves the integration of analytical reasoning, associated primarily with prefrontal cortical regions, with embodied intuition involving limbic and insular regions, rather than privileging either system alone. This principle helps explain why some people experience unnecessary tension in their decision-making process, feeling forced to choose between head and heart, when authentic guidance often operates through the integration of these complementary faculties. The either-or approach creates artificial conflict between aspects of wisdom that are designed to work together rather than in opposition. Have you experienced moments when your deepest intuitive guidance aligned perfectly with your most careful analytical thinking, creating an unusual clarity and confidence in a decision? Or conversely, have you felt torn between what your analysis suggests and what your intuition indicates, unsure which to trust? If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on an experience where you found integration between analytical thinking and intuitive guidance, or where you struggled to reconcile these seemingly different inputs. Your reflection might help others navigate this common challenge in discernment. This principle addresses a particularly modern struggle in discernment. The Enlightenment era elevation of rational analysis over other ways of knowing, while bringing many benefits, created an artificial separation between faculties that earlier wisdom traditions typically viewed as complementary. This historical shift has left many contemporary people with a fragmented approach to decision-making, experiencing conflict between analytical and intuitive guidance when these might better be understood as different aspects of a unified wisdom. Throughout history, those noted for exceptional discernment typically demonstrate integration rather than separation of these faculties. Leonardo da Vinci's remarkable innovations emerged from his deliberate integration of analytical thinking with intuitive insight, artistic sensitivity, and careful observation. Teresa of Avila emphasized that authentic spiritual guidance should ultimately satisfy both the soul and the understanding. Gandhi's approach to discernment involved both rigorous ethical analysis and deep attentiveness to the inner voice of conscience. These diverse examples suggest that the most reliable guidance often emerges not from choosing between analytical and intuitive faculties, but from their thoughtful integration. each providing important but incomplete perspectives that, when combined, create more comprehensive wisdom than either alone. How can we develop greater integration between rational analysis and intuitive guidance in our decision-making? Here are 3 approaches that people across different perspectives have found helpful in bridging this artificial divide. First, practice complementary sequencing rather than either-or choosing. Instead of feeling forced to select either analytical or intuitive approaches, experiment with deliberate sequences that honor both. Some find it helpful to begin with quiet, intuitive listening before engaging analytical thinking, while others prefer to start with careful analysis and then create space for intuitive impressions to emerge in response. Either sequence can work well, but the integration of both faculties typically produces more reliable guidance than either alone. Second, develop skill in recognizing the appropriate domain for each faculty. Analytical thinking excels in areas involving quantifiable factors, logical relationships, and sequential processes. Intuitive guidance often proves more reliable in domains involving complex human dynamics, value priorities, and long-term life direction. By recognizing where each faculty functions best, you can engage them appropriately rather than forcing either to operate beyond its optimal domain. Third, practice dialogical integration between analysis and intuition. Rather than treating these as separate competing approaches, experiment with creating an internal conversation between them. When analytical thinking yields a conclusion, invite intuitive response to that analysis. When intuitive guidance suggests a direction, engage analytical thinking to explore implications and implementation. This dialogical approach honors both faculties while allowing each to contribute its unique perspective to more integrated wisdom. I worked with a healthcare researcher, Rachel, who experienced persistent tension between her scientific training, which emphasized rigorous analytical thinking, and her spiritual practice, which included attentiveness to intuitive guidance. This tension became particularly acute when considering a career transition that would require significant lifestyle changes affecting her family. Rachel initially approached this decision with characteristic thoroughness, creating detailed pro-con lists, consulting relevant research, and analyzing financial implications. But alongside this analysis, she experienced persistent intuitive impressions, suggesting a direction that her initial analysis didn't strongly support. This created painful internal conflict as she felt forced to choose between being rational and following guidance. Through our conversations, Rachel began exploring whether this tension might reflect an artificial separation rather than an inherent contradiction. Rather than choosing between analytical and intuitive approaches, she experimented with more integrated practices, creating space for intuitive listening before analysis, engaging analytical thinking about the content of her intuitive impressions, and inviting intuitive response to her analytical conclusions. What emerged through this integration surprised her. Her analytical thinking revealed hidden biases in how she had framed certain factors in her initial analysis, while her intuitive guidance became more specific and actionable when engaged with thoughtful questions. The direction that ultimately emerged wasn't simply her initial analysis or her initial intuitive impression, but a more nuanced third path that integrated insights from both faculties. As Rachel later reflected, I had been experiencing analytical thinking and intuitive guidance as competitors, forcing myself to choose between them. What I discovered instead was that they function best as collaborators, each contributing essential perspective that the other might miss. The wisest path emerged not from choosing one over the other, but from their thoughtful integration. Now, are there decisions in your life where you've been experiencing tension between analytical thinking and more intuitive guidance? How might your approach change if you viewed these not as competing alternatives, but as complementary faculties designed to work together? What might emerge from their thoughtful integration that neither alone would generate? If this perspective resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, I recognize that authentic guidance often emerges through the integration of analytical thinking and intuitive knowing rather than requiring me to choose between them. I'm willing to explore how these complementary faculties might work together in my discernment. This intention creates space for a more integrated approach to wisdom that honors the unique contributions of different ways of knowing. The ninth key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is understanding that authentic wisdom typically integrates rational analysis with intuitive knowing rather than separating them. When you move beyond the artificial dichotomy between head and heart, you open yourself to more comprehensive guidance that emerges from the integration of these complementary faculties. If you've found value in these principles about discerning guidance, please consider taking a moment to engage with this content through likes, comments, or sharing. Your participation helps these perspectives reach others who might benefit from a deeper understanding of how wisdom operates in everyday decisions. Now, let's explore our 10th principle, which addresses a persistent question that troubles many people seeking guidance in their daily decisions. Have you wondered about the timing of guidance? Why direction sometimes comes early and other times seems delayed until the last moment? Have you struggled with knowing when to wait for greater clarity versus when to move forward with what you currently understand? Have you questioned whether delayed guidance reflects your own inadequacy or serves some deeper purpose? Our 10th principle offers insight into this common questioning. Authentic guidance operates through divine timing that balances growth with direction. Many people struggle with the timing of guidance, assuming that direction should ideally arrive well in advance of decision points and with complete clarity about the path ahead. When guidance instead comes later than expected, with only enough light for the next step, or even after they've been forced to act with incomplete understanding, they often question whether they've somehow failed spiritually or missed available direction. This struggle reflects a misunderstanding about how wisdom typically operates across time. Throughout wisdom traditions, we consistently find that guidance operates not according to our preferred timing, but according to a wisdom that balances our need for direction with our need for growth. Sometimes guidance comes early and completely. Other times, it arrives just in time or even retrospectively, not because of divine withholding or human inadequacy, but because the timing itself serves purposes beyond mere efficiency. In Jewish narratives, guidance to Abraham came with minimal details. Go to the land I will show you, requiring him to journey forward with incomplete information. The Christian Gospels repeatedly show Jesus providing guidance to disciples as they were able to hear it, not all at once. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei emphasizes acting in harmony with the natural timing of events rather than forcing premature clarity or action. Contemporary developmental psychology offers parallels through research on how optimal growth often involves a balance between support and challenge. Studies suggest that human development requires both clear guidance and opportunities to exercise agency amid uncertainty, a balance that applies to spiritual formation as much as to psychological development. This principle helps explain why guidance sometimes appears to be delayed or incomplete, not necessarily because we're failing to discern available direction, but because the timing itself serves purposes essential to our formation. The partial or progressive nature of guidance often creates space for growth that more complete or earlier direction might actually inhibit. Have you experienced situations where guidance came later than you wanted, but exactly when you needed it? Or times when initially frustrating delays in clarity ultimately served important purposes you couldn't have anticipated? If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on an experience where the timing of guidance, though not what you would have chosen, ultimately served purposes beyond mere efficiency. Your story might help others trust divine timing when clarity seems delayed in their own lives. This principle addresses the common frustration and self-doubt many experience when guidance doesn't arrive according to their preferred timeline. The assumption that optimal guidance should come early and completely creates unnecessary anxiety when direction instead unfolds gradually or arrives just in time. This anxiety reflects a misunderstanding about the purposes served by the timing itself, purposes that often extend beyond merely getting us efficiently from point A to point B. Throughout history, stories of significant guidance regularly include elements of timing that served purposes beyond mere efficiency. Joseph received dreams of his future leadership, but then endured years of slavery and imprisonment before those dreams were fulfilled, a timing that developed essential character qualities he would need for his eventual role. Moses spent 40 years in desert obscurity before his burning bush encounter, a delay that prepared him for leadership in ways that continuing in Pharaoh's court could not have accomplished. The early Christian community waited in Jerusalem for the Spirit's empowerment, rather than immediately beginning their mission, a delay that proved essential to their subsequent effectiveness. These narratives suggest that the timing of guidance typically serves multiple purposes simultaneously, providing direction when needed while creating space for essential formation that premature clarity might actually short-circuit. This dual purpose helps explain why guidance sometimes unfolds differently than our efficiency-focused expectations might prefer. How can we develop a healthier relationship with the timing of guidance in our lives? Here are 3 approaches that people across different spiritual perspectives have found helpful in navigating the sometimes mysterious timing of wisdom. First, practice trust in timely enough guidance. Rather than assuming direction should ideally come well in advance with complete clarity, experiment with trusting that guidance will arrive when most needed, sometimes early, sometimes just in time, sometimes even through retrospective understanding. This trust doesn't eliminate the discomfort of uncertainty, but reduces the additional anxiety created by assuming something is wrong when guidance unfolds according to a different timeline than we might prefer. Second, look for growth opportunities in periods of partial clarity. When guidance seems incomplete or delayed, ask yourself, what might be developing in me through this period of partial understanding that premature clarity might short-circuit? Often these waiting periods develop essential qualities, patience, trust, resilience, or receptivity that prove crucial for effectively implementing the guidance when it eventually arrives in greater fullness. Third, develop capacity for both active waiting and provisional movement. Waiting for clearer guidance doesn't necessarily mean doing nothing, just as moving forward doesn't require complete certainty. Experiment with active waiting, continuing to engage life fully while remaining open to emerging clarity. Similarly, practice provisional movement, taking exploratory steps based on current understanding while remaining flexible as greater clarity emerges. This balanced approach honors both the patience and the responsiveness that authentic guidance typically invites. I worked with a non-profit director, Michael, who faced a critical decision about potentially expanding his organization's work internationally. Despite sincere seeking through prayer, counsel, and careful analysis, the clear direction he desired remained elusive as his decision timeline grew increasingly urgent. Michael's initial response was anxiety and self-doubt, questioning his spiritual sensitivity, wondering if he had somehow missed available guidance, and feeling increasingly pressured as the decision point approached without the clarity he sought. Our conversations explored whether the timing itself might be serving purposes beyond mere efficiency, creating space for formation that premature clarity might actually inhibit. As Michael shifted from anxiety about delayed guidance to curiosity about its purpose, he began noticing subtle developments occurring through the waiting period. The lack of premature closure forced deeper conversations with key stakeholders, revealing important perspectives he might otherwise have missed. The extended uncertainty surfaced hidden assumptions in his leadership team that needed addressing before any expansion. The delay created space for essential relationships to develop with potential international partners who reached out unexpectedly during the waiting period. When guidance ultimately came, through an unusual convergence of counsel, circumstance, and inner clarity just weeks before the decision deadline, Michael found himself much better prepared to implement it wisely because of the formation that had occurred during the waiting period. The timing, though not what he would have chosen, had served purposes far beyond mere efficiency. As Michael later reflected, I was fixated on getting guidance according to my preferred timeline, assuming earlier was always better. What I discovered instead was that the timing itself was part of the wisdom, creating space for essential development that premature clarity would have bypassed. The guidance came exactly when I had developed the capacity to receive and implement it well, not when I thought I needed it. Biltasim, are there situations in your life where you've been anxious about apparently delayed guidance? How might your experience change if you trusted that direction unfolds according to a wisdom that balances your need for clarity with your need for growth? What might be developing in you through periods of partial understanding that premature clarity could actually short-circuit? If this perspective resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, I recognize that authentic guidance operates through divine timing that balances my need for direction with my need for growth. I'm willing to trust this timing even when clarity comes later or more gradually than I might prefer. This intention creates space to experience the sometimes mysterious timing of guidance, not as evidence of personal inadequacy or divine withholding, but as an expression of wisdom that serves purposes beyond mere efficiency. The 10th key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is understanding that authentic wisdom operates through timing that balances direction with formation. When you trust that guidance unfolds according to a wisdom that considers your growth as much as your need for clarity, you can navigate periods of partial understanding with greater peace and attentiveness to the development occurring through the very timing you might not have chosen. If these perspectives on discerning guidance have been valuable to you, please consider sharing this content with others who might benefit from a deeper understanding of how wisdom operates in everyday decisions. Sometimes, the insights that have helped illuminate our own path become gifts we can offer to fellow travelers on similar journeys. Now let's explore our 11th principle, which addresses a dimension of guidance that many people miss entirely in their search for wisdom in daily decisions. Have you noticed that some of your most significant moments of guidance have come not when you were actively seeking direction, but when you were simply present to what was before you? Have you experienced clarity arriving not through striving for answers, but through surrendering to what is? Have you wondered about the relationship between control and receptivity in the process of discerning wisdom? Our 11th principle illuminates this often overlooked dynamic. Authentic guidance emerges more through surrender than through striving. Many people approach guidance primarily through effort, striving to figure out the right direction, working to discern the correct path, or laboring to discover divine will. While dedication to discernment certainly matters, wisdom traditions consistently suggest that guidance emerges less through striving to grasp it and more through surrendering to receive it, a subtle but crucial distinction in how we position ourselves before wisdom. This principle of surrender appears across spiritual perspectives. The Christian contemplative tradition emphasizes abandonment to divine action rather than merely increased spiritual effort. Buddhist practice focuses on non-attachment and letting go rather than striving to achieve. The Taoist concept of Wu Wei emphasizes non-forcing or effortless effort rather than strenuousness. Across these diverse approaches, the common insight emerges: Wisdom comes more readily through release than through grasping. Contemporary psychology offers parallels through research on the paradoxical effects of thought suppression and the neuroscience of insight. Studies consistently show that direct efforts to control thoughts or force insights often produce counterproductive results, while periods of mental release following focused attention frequently yield the clarity that striving alone failed to generate. This principle helps explain why guidance sometimes arrives most clearly in unexpected moments, during a walk, while showering, or upon waking, when we've temporarily released our grip on the question rather than while we're actively striving to figure it out. The surrender of efforting often creates space for wisdom to emerge in ways that persistent striving actually inhibits. Have you experienced moments when clarity arrived not through increased effort, but through a kind of letting go? Times when guidance emerged after you surrendered your tight grip on needing to know or control the outcome. If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on an experience where surrender rather than striving created space for wisdom to emerge. Your story might help others recognize how releasing control often precedes receiving guidance. This principle addresses a common misconception in how many approach discernment, assuming that more spiritual effort necessarily produces clearer guidance. While dedication to the discernment process certainly matters, the quality of our attention often proves more decisive than its quantity or intensity. Sometimes what blocks guidance isn't insufficient effort, but excessive efforting that actually creates inner noise and tension that interfere with receptivity. Throughout history, stories of significant guidance often include elements of surrender preceding clarity. Jacob wrestled until exhaustion before receiving his blessing and new identity. Paul's dramatic guidance on the Damascus Road came after his physical sight was lost. John's apocalyptic vision arrived during exile on Patmos, when all his apostolic activity was forcibly suspended. In each case, a kind of surrender, whether chosen or imposed, preceded the emergence of profound guidance that changed their lives and impacted history. These narratives suggest that surrender isn't passive resignation, but active release, a conscious letting go of our demand to know, control, or determine outcomes according to our timeline and preferences. This release creates an inner spaciousness where wisdom can emerge more freely than when we're clutching tightly to our questions or managing their answers. How can we cultivate this quality of surrender that often precedes clearer guidance? Here are 3 approaches that people across different spiritual perspectives have found helpful in creating the receptivity that comes through release rather than grasping. First, practice intentional periods of laying down the question. While dedicated attention to discernment matters, experiment with deliberate times of completely releasing your focus on the question or decision at hand. This isn't abandoning the discernment process, but creating space within it, like a farmer who plants, waters, and then steps back, recognizing that growth happens through processes they can support but not control through constant intervention. Second, develop awareness of your specific patterns of over-efforting in discernment. Notice your particular tendencies toward excessive striving, perhaps obsessive analysis, repetitive thinking, anxious questioning, or demanding certainty beyond what's currently available. This self-awareness helps you recognize when you're slipping into counterproductive grasping that actually blocks the receptivity through which guidance most readily emerges. Third, incorporate surrender practices into your discernment process. Whether through contemplative prayer, mindfulness meditation, time in nature, creative expression, or physical movement, develop regular practices that help you release your grip on controlling outcomes and knowing answers. These practices develop the capacity for surrender that often precedes the emergence of wisdom that striving alone cannot produce. I worked with a business leader, David, who faced a complex decision about potentially merging his company with a larger organization. Despite extensive analysis, consultation with advisors, and sincere spiritual seeking, the clarity he desired remained elusive as the decision timeline grew increasingly urgent. David's typical approach to important decisions involved intensifying his efforts, gathering more data, consulting more experts, analyzing more angles, and extending his prayer times. While these practices had served him well in many situations, in this particularly complex decision, his increased striving seemed to be producing more confusion than clarity. The harder he worked to figure it out, the more tangled the considerations became, and the more anxious he felt about possibly making the wrong choice. In our conversations, we explored the possibility that his approach might actually be inhibiting the guidance he sought, that his intense efforting was creating inner noise and tension that interfered with the receptivity through which clarity might more readily emerge. David was initially skeptical of this perspective, concerned that anything less than maximum effort reflected insufficient commitment to the discernment process. Despite this skepticism, David agreed to experiment with a counterintuitive approach, creating deliberate periods of completely releasing his focus on the decision rather than intensifying his efforts to figure it out. He scheduled 2 full days away from his normal environment, but unlike his typical retreats focused on working harder on the question, this time he would practice laying it down completely, engaging in activities like hiking, simple manual work, and silent meditation with no agenda regarding the decision. What emerged from this experiment surprised him. After the first day of anxious adjustment to not working on the question, David experienced a profound shift, a spaciousness and peaceful clarity that had been absent during all his striving. On the morning of the 3rd day, he woke with an unexpected but unmistakable sense of direction regarding the merger. Not a voice or dramatic revelation, but a quiet knowing that seemed to emerge naturally from the space created by surrender, rather than from his previous efforting. As David later reflected, I had been approaching guidance like something I had to work harder to achieve or earn through increased spiritual effort. What I discovered instead was that the clarity I sought came not through more striving, but through a quality of surrender that created space for wisdom to emerge in ways my efforting had actually been blocking. The guidance had perhaps been available all along, but I could only recognize it when I released my tight grip on needing to figure it out through my own striving. Are there decisions in your life where you might be over-efforting in ways that actually block receptivity to guidance? How might your experience change if you complemented your dedicated discernment with periods of deliberate surrender, laying down the question completely to create space where wisdom might emerge more freely? If this perspective resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, I recognize that authentic guidance often emerges more through surrender than through striving. I'm willing to release my tight grip on needing to know and control, creating space where wisdom can emerge in its own time and way. This intention often precedes the receptivity through which guidance flows more freely than our efforting alone can produce. The 11th key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is understanding that wisdom emerges more through surrender than through striving alone. When you complement your dedicated discernment with this quality of release, you create the receptivity through which guidance often flows more freely than persistent efforting can generate by itself. If you found these principles about discerning guidance valuable for your own journey, please consider sharing them with others who might benefit from these perspectives. Sometimes the insights that have illuminated our own path become gifts we can offer to fellow travelers seeking greater clarity in their own decisions. Now, let's explore our 12th and final principle, which addresses perhaps the most foundational shift needed for recognizing guidance more consistently in daily life. Have you noticed that guidance often becomes clearer, not when you change your techniques, but when you deepen your relationship with the source of wisdom? Have you experienced how intimacy with wisdom itself creates a natural attunement that transcends specific methods of discernment? Have you wondered why some people seem to recognize guidance with unusual consistency regardless of their particular approach? Our 12th principle addresses this foundational reality. Authentic guidance flows from relationship with wisdom more than from techniques of discernment. Many people approach guidance primarily through methods, seeking the right techniques, practices, or steps that will yield clear direction when faithfully applied. While discernment practices certainly matter, wisdom traditions consistently emphasize that guidance flows more from relationship with the source of wisdom than from any particular method of seeking it. This relational foundation appears across spiritual perspectives. The Jewish tradition emphasizes that wisdom begins with the fear of the Lord, not techniques, but reverent relationship. Christian teaching highlights that the Spirit guides those who walk by the Spirit, suggesting ongoing relationship rather than merely methodological approaches. Buddhist practice emphasizes that insight emerges not primarily through techniques, but through the quality of awareness cultivated through consistent relationship with reality as it is. Contemporary research on expertise development offers interesting parallels. Studies show that experts across domains eventually transcend conscious rule following, developing instead an intuitive feel for their field that operates largely outside their conscious awareness. This expertise emerges not primarily through better techniques, but through deep immersion in relationship with the subject matter itself. This principle helps explain why some people seem to recognize guidance with unusual consistency regardless of their specific approach. What distinguishes them isn't superior methods, but deeper relationship, an ongoing intimacy with wisdom itself that naturally attunes them to its voice across varying circumstances and through diverse channels. Have you noticed how guidance becomes clearer, not primarily when you discover better techniques, but when you deepen your relationship with the source of wisdom? How the quality of your ongoing connection creates an attunement that transcends specific methods. If you're comfortable sharing, I invite you to reflect in the comments on how deepening relationship has enhanced your recognition of guidance beyond what techniques alone could accomplish. Your experience might help others shift their primary focus from methods to relationship in their own discernment journey. This principle addresses a common misplacement of emphasis in how many approach guidance, focusing on perfecting their techniques while underinvesting in the relationship from which wisdom primarily flows. While discernment practices certainly matter as expressions of relationship, they cannot substitute for the ongoing intimacy with wisdom that creates natural attunement to its voice. Throughout history, those noted for exceptional discernment consistently emphasize relationship over technique as the foundation of their guidance. Brother Lawrence spoke of practicing the presence of God in everyday activities rather than merely applying specific discernment methods. Howard Thurman emphasized cultivating the sound of the genuine within through ongoing interior relationship more than through particular practices. Etty Hillesum described her guidance as emerging from Hinninhorchen, listening within to the relationship with God constantly unfolding in her soul. These diverse voices point to a common recognition. While methods matter, relationship matters more. The most reliable guidance emerges not primarily from perfecting techniques, but from deepening intimacy with the source from which all true wisdom flows. How can we shift our emphasis from techniques to relationship as the foundation of our discernment? Here are 3 approaches that people across different spiritual perspectives have found helpful in developing the relational foundation from which guidance naturally flows. First, develop practices of presence more than protocols for answers. Rather than focusing primarily on what to do when you need specific guidance, invest in practices that deepen your ongoing presence to wisdom itself, whether through contemplative prayer, mindfulness meditation, lectio divina, or other approaches aligned with your beliefs. These relationship-building practices create the attunement from which specific guidance naturally emerges when needed. Second, expand your concept of spiritual practice beyond discrete activities to relationship throughout daily life. While dedicated times for spiritual practice certainly matter, experiment with approaches that extend relationship with wisdom throughout your day. Brief centering practices during transitions, attentiveness to presence while walking or driving, expressions of gratitude amid ordinary activities, or breath prayers during routine tasks. These integrated practices develop the ongoing relationship from which guidance consistently flows. Third, approach discernment questions from within existing relationship rather than as separate transactions. When specific guidance is needed, position your seeking within your ongoing relationship with wisdom rather than as an isolated inquiry. This might involve beginning discernment with expressions of trust, gratitude, or love rather than immediately focusing on your question. This relational approach creates a context of receptive intimacy from which guidance flows more naturally than through merely transactional seeking. I worked with a community leader, Sarah, who had developed sophisticated discernment practices for important decisions, but found herself increasingly frustrated with what felt like inconsistent results. Sometimes her carefully applied methods yielded remarkable clarity. Other times, the same approaches produced confusion or silence despite her sincere and skilled efforts. Through our conversations, Sarah began recognizing a pattern. Guidance flowed more consistently, not when her techniques improved, but when her relationship with God was most vibrant. The same discernment practices that yielded profound clarity during seasons of intimate connection often produced little insight during periods when busyness or ministry demands had subtly displaced her relational focus. This recognition led Sarah to a fundamental shift in her approach, from focusing primarily on perfecting her discernment techniques to prioritizing her ongoing relationship with God. While she continued valuing specific practices, she repositioned them as expressions of relationship rather than primarily as methods for obtaining guidance. Her daily rhythms shifted from emphasizing quiet times focused on Bible study and intercession to broader practices of presence throughout her day, brief centering prayers during transitions, regular attentiveness to divine presence in ordinary moments, and cultivation of ongoing dialogue rather than discrete prayer times alone. What emerged through this relational emphasis surprised her. Guidance began flowing more consistently, not because her techniques improved, but because her ongoing intimacy created a natural attunement to divine perspective. Like someone who can recognize a loved one's voice in a crowded room. Because of their intimate relationship, Sarah found herself increasingly able to discern authentic guidance across varying circumstances and through diverse channels because of her deepened connection with its source. As Sarah later reflected, I had been approaching guidance primarily as a methodological challenge, seeking the right techniques, steps, or practices that would yield consistent clarity when correctly applied. What I discovered instead was that while practices matter, relationship matters more. When my ongoing intimacy with God is vibrant, guidance flows naturally through whatever channels are available. When that relationship becomes distant or formal, even the best techniques produce limited results. Guidance emerges more from who I'm becoming in relationship with God than from what I'm doing to discover His will. OD, are there areas where you've been emphasizing techniques of discernment while possibly underinvesting in the relationship from which guidance primarily flows? How might your experience change if you shifted your primary focus from perfecting methods to deepening ongoing intimacy with the source of wisdom? If this perspective resonates with you, consider saying to yourself, I recognize that authentic guidance flows primarily from relationship with wisdom rather than from techniques of discernment. I'm willing to invest in deepening this ongoing connection, trusting that specific guidance will emerge naturally from the intimacy it creates. This fundamental shift in emphasis often precedes more consistent recognition of wisdom across all dimensions of life. The 12th and final key to recognizing guidance in your daily decisions is understanding that authentic wisdom flows primarily from relationship with its source, rather than from techniques of discernment. When you shift your emphasis from perfecting methods to deepening ongoing intimacy with wisdom itself, you develop the natural attunement through which guidance consistently flows across all dimensions of life. Now that we've explored these 12 principles for recognizing guidance, I'd like to lead us in a reflective practice that many have found helpful in creating space for deeper wisdom to emerge in daily decision-making. This practice can be adapted to fit your own belief system and comfort level, offering benefit regardless of your spiritual perspective. Find a comfortable position where you can be alert yet relaxed. If closing your eyes feels appropriate, allow them to gently close. Otherwise, simply soften your gaze and bring your attention inward. Begin by taking several slow, deep breaths, inhaling fully and exhaling completely. With each breath, allow your body to settle and your mind to quiet. This simple breathing creates space where deeper wisdom can be more easily recognized. Now bring to mind a decision or situation where you've been seeking guidance. Hold this question gently in your awareness, not straining for immediate answers, but simply allowing it to be present before you. As you continue breathing slowly and deeply, bring your attention to any tension you might be carrying around this decision, perhaps anxiety about making the wrong choice, pressure to know with certainty, or frustration about unclear direction. With each exhale, imagine releasing some of this tension, creating more internal space for wisdom to emerge. Now expand your awareness beyond just the specific question to the larger context of your life journey. Remember that this particular decision exists within a broader story, a path you've been walking and a direction you've been moving. Consider how this specific choice connects to the deeper values and purposes that matter most to you. From this wider perspective, gently revisit your decision, noticing what aspects of it now seem most significant or essential. Are there elements that suddenly appear more important than you'd previously recognized? Are there factors that now seem less consequential than you'd been making them? Simply notice what shifts when you view the decision from this broader context. Now invite wisdom regarding this situation to emerge in whatever way is most natural for your experience. This might come as words, images, physical sensations, memories, or simply a quiet knowing that rises from a deeper place than your usual thinking. There's no need to force any particular manifestation. Simply create space for guidance to emerge in its own way and time. As you remain in this receptive posture, also notice if any of the principles we've explored together particularly resonate with your current situation. Is there guidance already speaking that you haven't been recognizing? Do multiple streams of confirmation seem to be converging around a particular direction? Is inner noise interfering with your ability to discern wisdom that's already available? Is authentic guidance leading through difficulty rather than around it? Are subtle impressions offering direction you've been overlooking? Is wisdom coming in unexpected forms you hadn't been attuned to recognize? Is guidance operating through divine timing that's different from your preferred schedule? Would surrender, rather than additional striving, create space for wisdom to emerge more freely? How might deepening relationship with wisdom itself enhance your discernment beyond what techniques alone can accomplish? Allow any insights related to these principles to emerge naturally, without forcing particular conclusions. As we begin drawing this reflective practice to a close, consider what single step you might take to create more space for wisdom to guide your decision, not necessarily determining the entire path, but simply taking the next step that currently seems most aligned with deeper guidance. Finally, Express gratitude for whatever insights have emerged during this time, whether dramatic revelations or subtle impressions. Guidance often unfolds gradually, so remain open to further clarity that may emerge in the hours and days ahead as you continue this receptive posture toward wisdom in your daily life. When you're ready, slowly deepen your breathing, gently move your fingers and toes, and gradually return your attention to your surroundings, bringing with you whatever insights or direction have emerged during this reflective practice. Thank you for joining me in exploring these principles for recognizing guidance in your daily decisions. My hope is that these insights will help you discern wisdom with greater clarity and confidence as you navigate life's complex choices, not through formulaic approaches, but through developing the receptivity that allows deeper wisdom to emerge naturally in your unique journey. If you found value in these perspectives, please consider sharing them with others who might benefit from a deeper understanding of how guidance operates in everyday life. Sometimes the insights that have illuminated our own path become gifts we can offer to fellow travelers seeking wisdom for their own journey. May you continue to recognize the guidance that's already speaking in your life, finding direction not just for what to do, but for who you're becoming through each choice you make.